Hey gang, welcome back. How's it going? It's good to have you here. This is episode 158 of the Ranching Reboot podcast, the podcast that reboots your thinking about farming, ranching, food systems, and the people that operate them. I'm your host, Brian Alexander. You can find me on social media as Red Hills Rancher. On this podcast, I talk to some of today's most innovative and forward-thinking producers that are exploring new markets and doing things outside the mainstream. My guests today are going to talk about their biological approach to farming and how they develop their direct-to-consumer business. But first, a word from our sponsors. This season of Ranching Reboot is sponsored by LandTrust, the outdoor recreation network that offers access to over 1 million acres of private land across 40 states. Now that it's spring, it's a great time to start looking for your fall hunts for deer, elk, antelope, or maybe even look at some spring turkey hunts. No matter what large game you like to hunt, you can find it on LandTrust. For all you landowners out there, LandTrust is awesome from my perspective. It's kind of like Airbnb for hunting in the outdoors. You maintain 100% control over bookings, and you know who's coming and going. LandTrust has your back too with guest ID verification, and they also require prepayment, and they've got you covered with a $1 million liability policy. You'll never get stiffed on a hunting deal again with LandTrust. Hunting, fishing, hiking, birdwatching, and farm and ranch tours, you can find it all on LandTrust. Start your journey today with LandTrust at www.landtrust.com/reboot or by clicking the link in the show notes. I'm still working on getting the Steve Campbell videos uploaded and processed, along with the Alejandro Carrillo videos. My 5-year-old laptop is really struggling to process the files, so I ordered a new computer that'll help me step up the editing game. The first 3 parts of Steve Campbell are already up on my Red Hills Rancher YouTube, so watch my social media for more announcements when I get the rest of them processed and uploaded. Those and again, those are on my Red Hills Rancher YouTube channel. All right, if you want to come see me in person and score some sweet merch, I've got Ranching Reboot stickers. I've got a few hats, even some that say Alexander Ranch. I've got some really, really cool custom wild rags from my girl Brandy up at Montana Wild Rags. They've got the Ranching Reboot logo in them. I've got wild ass soap samples and stickers. I've got some LandTrust hats and a little bit of swag. So come see me at the Kansas Ag Expo in Hutchinson at the fairgrounds, April 4th, 5th, and 6th. Mike Calicrate from Calicrate Beef and Ranch Food Direct, might have also heard him once or twice on this podcast. He's going to be there. Justin Harris from Wild Ass Soap Company is going to be there, and I'll be there, and we'll be doing shows on the live stage. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but it'll probably be entertaining. All right, for this week's episode, I got to talk to somebody and do something I've wanted to do for a long time. This week, we talked to Kelly and Dana Lozinsky from Guardian Grains. Based out of North Dakota, Kelly and Deanna are direct marketing heritage grains and pasta. And as a special bonus for Ranching Reboot listeners, if you'd like to try some of the Guardian Grains flour or pasta, use the coupon code REBOOT at checkout for 20% off your order of flour, grain, or pasta. And I don't believe that applies to any of the mock mills. So anyway, Guardian Grains, 20% off, Reboot at checkout. That's it. I'll shut up and we'll get into it with 159 with Deanna and Kelly Lozinsky. Kelly and Deanna, good morning and welcome to Ranching Reboot. How are you guys?
Hey, doing great.
Good
Good
morning.
to see
Doing
you.
Great.
Well, it's good to be seen and it's good to see you guys too. So why don't we start off by just introducing yourselves just briefly, real quick?
Sure. We are Kelly and Deanna Lozinsky. We farm in central North Dakota. We operate a plant-based grain farm on 2,200 acres and of cropland and 2,800 acres total. So 600 acres of managed native and planted wildlife habitat, pollinator habitat, and water resources that we are managing in about a 2-mile radius, like I said, right central North Dakota.
What
We grow
town are
a
you?
variety of small grains, anything from wheat, oats, barley, flax, peas, mustard, and we also incorporate heritage wheat varieties, Rouge de Bordeaux, spelt, turkey red winter wheat, and Egyptian hullus barley into our system. So that's just kind of a brief overview of what it looks like on our farm.
Okay. And like most of the other guests I have on this show, that's not necessarily the normal of what your neighbors are doing, or probably how you guys started out. So maybe walk me through a little bit about what the typical farmer does, like your neighbors, how they farm, and how you guys started farming.
Well, we started, I've been no-tilling for quite some time. So I started no-tilling in like 2000. So that part of the operation was more conservation oriented. There's still a lot of tillage done around us. High-speed discs have become the predominant tool that most are using to dry the soil out to get into the fields because the water doesn't infiltrate anymore.
But they're using a no-till drill, so
But
there's
yeah,
that.
yeah, still using a no-till drill, but running the high-speed disc in front of the no-till drill.
That makes sense.
When we started no-tilling, we were in a high input no-till system. So we really, in the beginning, we focused on crop nutritional needs. So we're really pushing yields, pushing all our nutrients, which when we were pushing all of our nutrients pretty high to optimize yield, we saw increased disease pressure and increased pest pressure in our crops. And that was steadily increasing through the years. So we're going to, one fungicide application led to two fungicide applications, led to fungicide applications on the seed, led to a third foliar fungicide application just to manage disease pressure. And along with those, while we're out there, we're putting insecticide in as well because there's bugs that are attacking the crop now, so to speak. So we were pushing yields beyond what I know now, beyond the carrying capacity of our land is what we were doing. And that's
Can I stop you? So it sounds like when you started no-tilling in 2000 or around 2000, that it was more like it was like chemical fallow. There was still a lot of chemical fallow. There was still a lot of things like that going
on our operation.
Yeah.
We were continuous crop.
Okay.
Yeah, we were continuous crop and crop rotation, raised quite a few different crops. A lot of those crops were GMO crops, GMO soy, GMO canola, GMO sunflowers, GMO corn. A lot of those in the beginning because weeds were becoming more resistant. So our herbicide rates were increasing as well. Weeds were becoming resistant to what we were doing. So we're looking at GMO crops as alternatives to try to keep the weeds out of the system.
Is that because you could use something like a Roundup Ready corn or Roundup Ready alfalfa and be able to manage weed pressure with a chemical?
Yeah, we were using Roundup Ready genetics, Liberty Link genetics. Never did do any clear. No, we did some Clearfield canola. That was just into a different herbicide for a brief period of time as well. But it just seemed like the weeds were getting worse. They were becoming super weeds. Like what we were doing was no longer effective.
Could have been all the nitrogen we were putting down.
What we know now, yeah, that's what we have found now.
Creating our own problems with these supersized weeds that we were spoon feeding nitrogen to was a lot. It was a huge problem. So we farmed that way up until 2013. And a majority, I would say, of our neighbors are currently farming in that context where they are pushing yield and managing for disease and pests. That is what I would say a majority of our neighbors are the current model
and
for them.
Soybeans have really over North Dakota. So that's our number one crop right now. So I mean they've overruled wheat. I mean, we're naturally a grassland up here and now we're covered with beans, legumes, and a lot of corn coming in now too.
And we don't believe that soybeans can be grown responsibly this far north. It leaves a lot of open ground for us over the winter where we have a lot of wind and a lot of cold, and sometimes the snow comes and sometimes it doesn't. So we can have a lot of bare soil showing on those soybean grounds this far north. So I really feel, and it's different for us in North Dakota where we are central North Dakota, north of Bismarck. It's different for us growing soybeans than it is, let's say, in the Red River Valley near Fargo, where they do have an opportunity to get a little bit of some cover going maybe after soybean harvest. It's not a 3 or 4 hour difference in drive, but it's a huge difference in context in what we can get to grow after, let's say, a soybean harvest. So I don't feel like where we are that they can be grown responsibly. If you're looking at it from a soil health perspective and a resource concern, right, of preserving our soil. So we eliminated those soybeans from our system because Kelly was just like, this, it's just not paying. We
were pushing the beans, for the genetics and everything, but I mean, along with that, we saw increased salinity issues happening on our farm, increased erosion, stuff like that. So we eventually just bailed on the beans and pulled them out. I guess because we more so shifted our focus on soil health rather than crop revenue and what was going to generate us the most income, what was going to be the best for our soil and be one with that.
So when did you guys start to make that shift from the chemical kind of chemically weeded no-till type system to the soil health and more natural health system?
About 2014.
And did you have a moment, like, did you have like just a aha moment, or was it just something, hey, we're just going to do this?
Oh, there was a lot of information available. I mean, I did a lot of digging, heard people like Dr. Christine Jones. I did a lot of YouTube University, spent the winter, watching video after video. And I mean, Keith Burns at Green Cover, you had some great resources in the beginning. Got involved, early on, we got involved, the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP. So we had some funding available there to help implement some of these things and reduce the economic impact on our farm by taking these changes. Because I mean, in the beginning, it's scary, when you're drastically changing the way you're doing things. But initially, we took like 500 acres the first year, and we pulled the fertility on it. Just pulled everything we were doing. I mean, we were
like all the inputs.
Yeah, we pulled. So at that time, we had increased our fertility to variable rate site specific fertility. So we were pulling a soil test from each soil type on each field. So that resulted in about 5 soil tests per field per zone. So each one of those soil types now got exactly what we thought at the time it needed, or what our industry standard was prescribing for it. So then that increased our fertilizer use. So we're now applying phosphorus, or now applying potassium, sulfur, and zinc along with our phosphorus and our nitrogen. But that first year we pulled that 500 acres, we pulled all those fertilizer inputs off. We stopped using our fungicide, insecticide, seed treatments cold turkey. We stopped the fungicide applications. We stopped the insecticide applications. We just stopped, and we took that on 500 acres, 3.5% organic matter or higher. We decided, I think I can raise a pretty decent crop on those acres. It's 500 acres. So let's try it and see what happens.
And at the time, we were spread over 7,500 acres at that time. So we were farming much more land. Over a 50-mile radius 11 years ago. So it was a different system then, and
100% rented ground too, because we started renting all of our ground and leasing all of our machinery and borrowing all of our money.
Do you guys know Adam Chappell?
We actually don't know him personally, but every chance we get to listen to anything that he's done or any presentation that he's given virtually, we have heard.
Yeah.
I was just sitting here thinking about his quote that I think he credits his grandfather. It's a lot easier to get big than it is to get small.
Isn't that true? That's so true.
That's true.
And so like he said, that was on 500 acres. And that what was interesting that year is on those 500 acres where there was no fertilizer applied, we also noticed a reduced impact from pest pressure and a reduced impact on we're obviously not using fungi, but there was no disease either. And so it was, from our standpoint at that time, it looked like our disease and pest pressure was coming from the heavy fertilizer and creating these plants that weren't as resilient as they needed to be to defend themselves from pests and disease.
Because through 3 applications of fungicide plus a fungicidal seed treatment, we then ended up with a bacterial infection in our wheat. And then there was no cure for a bacterial infection. So once we stopped all that heavy fertility, that bacteria infection went away. So that was kind of an aha moment. Like, it's what we were doing that was causing the problems.
There might be a theory there. So I kind of feel like we've sprayed enough fungicide in the world that we've killed most of the fungus, most of the mycorrhiza, because it's kind of a branch of biology we just don't know a whole lot about. And if the same kind of ratios apply to fungi as they do to, say, insects, right? Like 97, 98% of insects are beneficial. It's just that 2% we're trying to get rid of. So what if it's just 2% of the fungi that cause some of the problems in, I guess we can say, modern cropping systems, modern high input cropping systems, and that in the pursuit to kill these several, like, handful of bad fungus, we've gotten rid of all the good ones. So I was sitting here and I had the idea, like you're talking about 3 fungicide applications, and then you got a bacterial infection in your wheat that there was no cure for. I would bet that there was a fungi that was designed in nature to prevent that bacteria from infecting plants. And because of all the fungicide that you got to spray for, like, leaf stripe rust or some bullshit, we kill all the good ones and allow those bacterial infections to take place.
Right. So what we thought meant being good farmers was actually creating more of our issues.
Yeah, causing the next problem.
And then affecting our bottom line inevitably, because all of those inputs cost a lot of money, and they were affecting our ROI for sure.
That's kind of almost a theme in the whole industry, whether we're talking about grain farming, vegetable farming, or cattle, or sheep, goats, whatever. It's like they want to sell us an input to fix something, but it just causes the next problem that they get to sell us something else to fix.
That's probably not an accident. It may be it has probably proven to be a very successful business model for them.
I mean, there's a lot of money in treatment. There's not a lot of profit in cure. I'll admit that.
Yes. Right.
I'll admit
right.
that.
So, and we didn't realize it at the time when we started transforming the system that we were trying to heal the system. We didn't realize that. We were really just trying to reduce our inputs. And we didn't understand that what we were doing and how we were farming was actually harming our soil and harming our ecosystem and not producing the best food for either animals or people. And so we didn't realize that at the time when we started the transition into this, where we are now. It's just been a real ripple effect.
But a lot of it was just simply letting go. You just had to let go of that control. We were trying to control the environment, and we simply had to let go, and try to delicately dance within that environment and not step on someone's toes and create the next problem.
Minimizing our disturbance, right? Whether that is with how we plant with a no-till drill, or whether that's the herbicide we use, we are minimizing our disturbance. So we're still using a herbicide on our no-till farm. Like we mentioned, no-till is the foundation of everything that we are doing on the farm. And part of that is, as a resource concern, we have very rolling terrain, and some of the slopes that we farm are 30%. And we have a lot of wind and erosion concerns.
Highly erodible ground. You know, we farm some highly erodible ground. So, I mean, it's,
If you're
we have to
farming
maintain
30-degree hills, like they didn't even try those here. I mean, they might have, but they washed so bad as soon as they're broke out. Like there's kind of a break. We'll have our tops at, 5 to 12 degrees. And a lot of those out here were farmed. Not very many of them here on my ranch, fortunately, just some of the top ground that is that flat down on the south end. But like you see behind me, a lot of it's 20 and 30-degree slopes on the hillsides. And fortunately, they didn't try to break those out here, because if they would have, it would all be, we just have peaks and big flat valleys full of mud.
And what we're finding is it's our job to protect the resource, right? So if we are farming on a 30% slope, we need to make sure that soil is staying where it needs to stay. It's not blowing over the winter, and that it's not washing down the hill into the valley, because we are reliant upon the soil to produce our crop. If we're not going to apply fertilizer, we are relying on the soil and its biology and the organic matter to produce a crop for us. So we need to protect it at all costs. And for us, that means no-till and minimizing our disturbance with a herbicide, right? Because it's not that herbicide doesn't disturb anything. It's our lesser of two evils when we're looking at how to control or manage for unintended plants, which are okay with us if we have sufficient water to support all of the things growing in the field.
And you guys are all dry land, right?
yes.
100% dry land, and we had 3 years of drought. We're hoping for an early spring and to be planted and then let the rain come. We're hoping this is the 4th year and maybe like the break in the cycle.
Yeah, we've been in a D4 followed by a D3 followed by a D2. So 3 years in a row drought cycle right now.
I was there. I was also kind of in the fortunate area that May, June, we caught great rains last year in May and June, and it grew a tremendous amount of grass. I went from D4 to D0. According to the National Weather Service, we went from D4 to D0 as fast as they've ever seen in less than 30 days.
Really?
Trust me, I understand drought. I know it's horrible. But I kind of want to go back to the 500 acres that you originally started on when you went no-till 10 years ago. Was that your ground or rented ground?
We were all rented at that time.
Okay.
So that was our first year. Let's see, that was our first year purchasing our first farm ground.
Okay.
We bought it 2 years.
We bought it in
2 years,
2013.
2012 or 2013. 1 year prior, we started ownership of land. So that first 500 acres was on farm ground we owned. Okay.
I was going to ask, like, how hard was it to get landowner buy-in?
To get, what was that?
Landowner buy.
To get landowner buy-in?
We are mostly, at the time, we're operating in a 3-year lease, and our landlords didn't want to see weeds, and they wanted their check on time. They had very little interest in much else that we were doing, and we were allowed to manage it as we saw fit. At our own risk on a 3-year lease, that could mean that we would transition these acres in a more holistic system, and they could pull the lease, which happened. It happened to us.
Yeah, that happened. The first 500 acres was on our first farm that we purchased and the farm that we were renting from my dad at the time. So there was,
we called them home acres.
Right? So they were our home base acres. So that's where that first 500 acres there started. So we knew we had long-term control on that first piece of ground. Because like I said, the other rented pieces, we didn't have that owner involvement there, or that long-term security to try something different. Because we had seen any of the long-term no-till ground, as soon as it changes hands, they're in there usually with a disc ripper and rip it deep, to put a bunch of oxygen in, and then you get, 3-4 years of really good crop, because you're now mineralizing all that organic matter rapidly. And that's what we've seen happen time and time again on that rented ground, that where it goes from no-till back into tillage.
And some of the landlords Kelly had been farming, renting from for over 20 years. And some of the landlords his dad had been renting from for 49 years. So they're long-term, it's been a long-term relationship on short contracts, but that we'd been able to continue to farm and rent land from these core landowners, and we did that for a long time. And when rent prices got driven up by one particular farmer, and they wanted to up the rent to astronomical prices, it made it easier to let those acres go. And that's how we started minimizing acres, really looking to do less, or farm less, and have more profit. And that was really a focus of being able to be home more. And at that time, we also started a family. Our kids are 10 and 8. And so when we started the transition on our farm, it was really finding out a way of having Kelly have more time as we built and grew our family. And as you can imagine, when he's talking about 7 sprayer passes over 7,500 acres, we never saw him in the month of June and most of July. And so it was a real focus to try to get him to have more of a home life with us, and have him get to experience our kids at a very young age.
So out of all those acres, out of the 7,500 rented acres, we found about 2,800 of really good landowners, really good ones. And a lot of these landowners were older, and they still had that connection to the land.
Okay.
What we were finding, once that land had passed generation upon generation, the newer, younger generation was so far disconnected that land was just an asset generating income for them.
They live in Chicago or Minneapolis, and they need that check.
Yeah. They look at their return on their investment, what that land cost, and what they want for return for rental rates. Where a lot of the ones we found, were from an earlier, older generation, and they still had that connection for the land. They wanted to do what was best for the land. And those people were out there. And I mean, we found quite a few of them right around us, around home, that really appreciated what we were doing and put value in how we were working with the land. And that's the ones we ended up purchasing a lot of that land, because we're now running about 80% owned on our farm ground.
And we kind of have a motto that soil health pays always. And the transformation of our farm, going from 100% rented on 7,500 acres 11 years ago to 80% owned on 2,800 acres, is the best way to show that. There's no spreadsheet I can put up, no data that I can give you, other that to me is the most important metric to show that the way we've transitioned our farm has actually been more profitable and more fulfilling for us as a family, and as on a personal level. It's given us a sense of purpose that we didn't have before as farmers. And part of that came only 3 years ago, when we realized that we were growing food and not a commodity.
Okay. I guess let's stay there on that track and tell me about that. Like, was there something in your life that hit you like a lightning bolt that said, hey, we're growing commodities, not food?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we mentioned that we grow a lot of wheat. We're a small grains operation for the most part, especially once we transitioned out of GMO soy and corn. And we were not eating any of the grain that we grow on the farm.
So just for reference, like, and I hope you'll get there and tell us about what you grow today, but tell us what you were growing 5 years ago.
5 years ago, there was still a little soy in the mix.
No, not 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we were wheat, peas, and yellow mustard.
Wheat, peas, and yellow mustard, and small grains. Wheat, wheat, peas, yellow mustard, and we were out of beans by then.
We're out of beans, yeah, and out of corn, and out of
and even the
sunflowers, and out
conventional
of
beans,
canola.
because we were also raising conventional soybeans at the
Okay.
time to try to get away from GMO beans. And so conventional beans were a help for us to get out of soybeans completely. So, so yeah, similar to what we're growing today, 5 years ago. But we weren't utilizing any of the grain on our tables.
Well, 10 years ago was when we switched to those, what I refer to as low input crops. So we went to crops that we could financially remain viable on lower nitrogen inputs, lower fertility inputs, what we thought at the time. So that would reduce our nutrient load on the landscape. You know, that's where our yellow mustard came in, and our peas and all that stuff. You know, we could reduce our flax, we could reduce our nutrient load and still remain economically viable.
I'm going to ask a question. Did you get to the point where you did not feel like a farmer because nothing you grew was on your table?
It didn't occur to us until I read an ad on an online platform for a man in our state, and only about an hour from us, to the north and to the west of us, that was looking for desiccant-free wheat berries. And I was like, what the heck is a wheat berry? And I had to look it up, and it's just the seed. It's just the grain. But there's a whole community of home millers, people that are actually milling whole grain into flour in their homes to make bread and cookies and all of the baked goods. And I had no context for that at all. Our flour came from the store, and our bread also came from the store. So we had no context of any of that. And so I did a quick Google search of what it took to sell whole grain to a consumer. And all I needed was a white food grade bucket. And so I called Kelly and I said, hey, can you have clean seed? And he was like, yeah, we got clean seed, because on our farm, we also save our seed. That's one of the beauties of growing non-GMO crops, is that we can save our own seed. And so I said, can you bring me 2 buckets of clean wheat seed? And he was like, sure. He doesn't ask a lot of questions. Partly because I'll go down some wormhole and be like, this is what we're doing. And so he just brought me the grain. And I said, before you go anywhere, how much can I get for that? And he's like, Deanna, you have 70 pounds of grain right here. This is 1 bushel. And at the time it was worth $5.40.
I was going to say, it's like you got $5 worth of wheat there.
Yeah. Very similar to where we're at right now in market price. And I said, well, I can't sell it for $5.40. The bucket cost me 10. And he said, sell it. I was like, right. So there's this guy who is looking for desiccant-free wheat berries. And he said, as you might guess,
what's a desiccant-free wheat berry?
What the heck is a wheat berry? And I was like, okay, it's just grain. And he wants it for home milling. And Kelly said, people do that? I was like, evidently, people are making their own flour at home. Like, how did we not know about this amazing community? And he was like, I don't know. And I was like, well, he said he would give me $25. And he's like, you're going to get $25 for that bushel of wheat? I was like, no, he's going to give me $25 for each bucket of wheat. And Kelly's like, you can't sell it for that. That's not what they do. That's not you, you can't charge that much. And I said, he can't find desiccant free wheat, Kelly. We
Like
have desiccant-free wheat that he needs access to. I'm absolutely selling it. So I quickly made up a logo, and I wanted to make sure that there was a sticker on his bucket so he knew where to come back to when he ran out. And I met him the very next day. He's our first customer, and he changed everything about the way I look at how we farm. We started at that point, we started looking at growing food instead of growing a commodity, and looking at ways that we could take a portion of the grains that we grow and sell them direct to consumer, so we could have the fulfillment of seeing it on other people's plates. Because I feel like if more farmers saw where their grain ended up, and if more farmers put the grains that they're growing on their own plates, it would change the way they farm. And when we put it on the plates of our families first, it really changes our perspective of what and how we are growing food. And so since that time, we have milled our own flour at home and baked our own bread. And there's been a huge learning curve, and we are all
Flake our own barley for breakfast.
yes.
Yep.
So
We're eating the grains we grow.
One online ad, one customer changed our whole outlook on what we are doing as farmers, and our job to feed and protect not only the soil, the people that we're feeding and the animals that we're feeding becomes a very important role. And we were always proud to be farmers. It just changed it and brought it to a next level when we could actually see where the grain is ending up.
And that original customer still comes out to the farm, and he'll ride in the combine with us, and he'll come out, he'll bring his bucket, he'll come out here and he'll fill up his bucket. But when he comes out, he says, I can't believe all the pheasants along the road. You know, I can't believe the turtles, the salamanders, the frogs, that, you know, all the wildlife that he sees on the drive in here.
The deer and the moose.
The deer and the moose.
And that's been one of the ripple effects of transitioning our system, is that while we're not incorporating domestic livestock onto our farm currently, we have welcomed the native livestock to come back. And they've come back in numbers that we didn't know were possible, and that animals we never saw before are making our ecosystem home. And to have a customer come down and say, I just love the drive in here. I get to see so much wildlife. And it's one of those things that we've really grown to appreciate and really have noticed the change just from the way we're farming.
Good stuff. I really like that comment, that line of thinking about most farmers don't know where their grain goes or what. They're just content to take it to the elevator and get $5 a bushel or whatever.
Yep.
And, you know, my friend Mike Calicrate loves to talk about the farmer rancher share of the food dollar. And he likes to show, you know, how the rancher's share of the consumer beef dollar has done nothing but fall in the last, 35, 40 years. And I'm not a grain farmer, obviously. I kind of remember what grain prices were when I was a kid, and I kind of know what they are now. And they're about the same, which is good for the consumer, but not necessarily great for the producer, because
the combine costs $1.2 million.
Right. We're not driving around John Deere 7720s that you can buy, with pocket change anymore. It's, a John Deere X9 1100 that cost $1.2 million. It's a John Deere 9RX 620 that's $700,000. It's, $1 million air cart and seeder rig. It's several $100,000 worth of high speed disc.
Right.
It's $3 a gallon diesel fuel versus 99 cents a gallon. All these cost structures have changed, and okay, so get more efficient, get bigger, push those guys out. But in getting bigger, we have to do these things that, quote, save time. Like, okay, well, instead of managing the crop rotation, managing the soil fertility naturally, we're going to go out there and apply synthetic fertilizer. Instead of managing our bug pressure naturally. We're just going to go spray insecticide. And it's these crutches. We've leaned on these crutches for so long that now they've become necessary, right?
Yes.
And let's see. So I think the average wheat farmer gets less than 12 cents a bushel back on their grain, like profit from, through the whole process of milling and going to bread or to chips or crackers or whatever. The farmer is going to get back less than 10 cents on the dollar from that. And that might even be high. And there's a bigger thought here about growing commodities and being a commodity trader versus actually growing food. And yes, quote, we need to feed the world, but we also really need to feed ourselves, and we need to learn how to feed our communities. And that means we need to learn how to feed the soil. And okay, yeah, it's tragic. Starving pygmies in Africa, whatever. We've got starving homeless children in Denver. We've got, the Bay Area, New York City. There's starving homeless people in this country. Like, let's try to take care of our own before we're sending food aid to New Guinea or, or wherever. I'm starting to really think a lot about people that call themselves farmers that don't actually grow food they can eat. If you're just growing commodity crops like corn and soybeans and alfalfa, what are you eating there? What are you eating there? What goes on your table? And would you eat it even if you could? I mean, we can't eat soy until soy's been fermented. We can't eat number 2 yellow dent corn. We can't eat it. And we don't eat alfalfa either. So what are we feeding? Feeding cows in a feedlot 1,000 miles away? That seems like an effective use of resources. Let's use water that's 100 million years old, or let's use energy that's 100 million years old to pump water that's 10,000 years old onto a crop today, so we can cut that crop with more diesel fuel and haul it 500 miles and feed it to a cow that's standing in a pen on concrete. Makes perfect sense to me. And we wonder why we have so many chronic illnesses, novel chronic illnesses that are creeping into our population. It's because of what we're putting into our bodies. It's because of what we're putting onto our soil.
Well, and to be fair, let's just say the beef that's at your local store, do you think that's a really good representation of the beef that you're growing?
Very similar to how the wheat your neighbors are growing is nothing like the product you're growing.
Even on the store shelves for bread, that representation is not even close to the nutritional value that is being grown on even conventional farms.
And that's the direction that we've pushed this. We have an overfed, malnourished society because we've been pursuing yield. We've been pursuing increasing our market demand, increasing the utilization of all these crops, increasing consumption, which we've done that. Now we have chronic illnesses, we have obesity, we have an overfed nation that's malnourished.
And doesn't that make sense from
a soil perspective as well? We are overfeeding the soil with all these nutrients, and now our soil has become malnourished. It can no longer supply, it no longer biologically functions to supply the crop's nutritional needs.
And doesn't that make sense? We grow more so they can pay us less. That's economy 101. That's supply and demand. We'll grow the best and the biggest crop, and then guess what?
We'll pay you less for it because there's a production surplus.
Right.
Yeah, we're always in a surplus situation.
Farmers creating our own problems, right? Because part of that pride comes from, it's ingrained in us that yield proves that you are a good farmer. Like how big and how massive, how many bins can you fill? And and what has happened is we have proven that farmers are overachievers, and we will grow the most because we feel fulfilled in the yield part. And unfortunately, creating our own problems, because the surplus, then they can pay us less for it. And the quality of the grains that we are growing now are not what they need to be to feed the nation better. And we need to be focused on how we can do that better. And to be fair, I just want to make sure that everyone understands that a majority of the grain that we grow still goes to the local elevator. It still goes to the co-op, right? 0.5% of the grains we grow goes direct to consumer. So this is a passion project for us, and it has really been about getting closer to what it is to feed your community.
But no doubt, even looking at those cows in your background, I mean, a steak off that cow, you could probably have an 8-ounce steak and have more nutrition coming into the human body off that animal in that grassland versus that cow on the concrete feedlot. You'd probably need to eat a 24-ounce steak to get even close to the same as an 8-ounce, or even probably a 4-ounce portion of that animal that stands behind you there.
And when I eat
at.
my cows, I eat a whole heck of a lot less than when I'm eating out in a restaurant.
We find
100%.
that the same is true with the bread that we
even-
make and the pasta that we eat and that we grow on the farm, and then we produce the pasta. It changes the way we consume. And
we'll come right back there. I'm a little surprised by your ratios, that only 0.5% of what you grow goes direct to consumer, that the rest goes to the elevator. And I want to kind of maybe like tackle that in two parts. So there's still conventional type crops you guys grow, like the barley, the wheat. Okay. That's a pretty easy to market to the co-op, but some of this like Rouge de Bordeaux and the spelt and these other things, how hard is it to find a market for those? Since I would have thought, like listening to you guys talk and looking at your website, that, you know, there's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And some of those specialty things are almost all direct to consumer or wholesaled, not necessarily to an elevator, but like to, I can't think of anything right now, but like a natural type producer. Mm-hmm. Doesn't seem like that's the case. You have to take a lot to the elevator, right?
Right. So currently, and gratefully, our local elevator doesn't care what type or what variety of wheat, of hard red spring wheat, we deliver to them.
So initially, the ancient grains were started for a niche
market,
direct market, direct to consumer.
And we're talking market. 60 acres of, let's take Rouge de Bordeaux. It started out with 60 acres. That was going to be used to go more of a direct to consumer. So the rest of the acres were a modern wheat that we could deliver safely, you know, for sure deliver to the local elevator and meet the specs, right? What are they looking for? They're looking at, they want 14 protein from us in a hard red spring wheat, and they would like it to be 13.5 moisture. Those are the specs that they're wanting it to meet, and no vomitoxin. So we knew that we started with 60 acres of the Rouge de Bordeaux to direct market. That's a very few acres of the grains that are on our farm. So it was not a very big amount of acres for what we were growing. Then we started to see the soil health benefit of this heritage wheat.
Larger root system. When you pull the nitrogen off of our current genetics, you know, nitrogen causes rapid cell elongation. So Around 1960, somewhere in there, a dwarf gene was inserted into most wheat varieties. That was about the same time as the Green Revolution came about. So that's about when nitrogen started to become utilized on all of our croplands. So the nitrogen causes rapid cell elongation, which caused the plant to get real tall and leggy and lodge and fall over. So then they dwarf the wheat genetics, dwarf the plants down. So when we pull the nitrogen out of our system, now those plants are really short. I mean, really short. So our grain removal was about the same on those two wheat varieties, but our old genetics without the dwarf gene, our carbon input into the system was much, much greater. Larger root system, larger above ground biomass.
And it just, it
You
did.
mean the carbon it was leaving behind was larger, or you had to put more carbon on it?
No, the carbon it was inputting into the system, you know, by establishing a larger root system.
Okay. Okay.
You know, we've got a lot more root system to decompose once that crop is off the field. Once that grain's removed off the field, we have a lot more high carbon straw to protect our soil, a lot more high carbon straw produced versus on the grain removed to decompose by fungi in our soil than our modern wheat. So grain removal is about the same, but we're putting a lot more roots back into the ground and we're putting a lot more straw back into the ground. And I think that was ignored when we dwarfed all that, because we were looking at productivity, you know, so how can we handle less straw with our combines? They saw a benefit on the smaller plants.
And we can't let that plant grow all that stem when we want it to grow grain, right?
Well, because you're putting it all through your machine, right? But in comes the shell-borne Reynolds stripper head, and now we can grow 4-foot tall heritage wheat varieties and just strip the wheat out of the heads and actually not have to process all of the straw, right? And so we can leave that standing and, like Kelly said, make it so we have food to feed our microbial communities for a longer period of time. And so that started out on 60 acres of that French heritage wheat. We saw enough of a soil health benefit that the next year, I think there was 400 acres of this wheat. And I reminded him that I don't have a market for 400 acres of Rouge de Bordeaux. Like this is a word of mouth type of market that we're building. And it's really a grassroots like effort. And I don't have a marketing team behind me. So keep that in mind. And he said, it will meet elevator spec and we can deliver any variety of hard red spring wheat to the local elevator currently. And as long as our system will meet the specs that the elevator wants, we can deliver it to the elevator. And we'll have the soil health benefit and we'll have the taller straw, and it won't really matter what variety we're growing. And so that took a little bit of the pressure off of me and trying to build a market specifically for that grain. And last year, he upped the acres to 1,400 acres of Rouge de Bordeaux. And
that bigger plant uses more water. You know, obviously it's a taller plant, but with that, you know, gives us the soil protection. So that's gonna help our water infiltration. So we're gonna utilize our water better. We're gonna infiltrate our water better, and we can use more water with that plant. We were finding once we pulled all the synthetic inputs away, we started cycling residue faster than we could replace it. You know, and that was something that kind of blew my mind, because on our high fertility days, yep.
How long did it take to start seeing that biology and that natural fertility to start cycling in the system?
Probably about year 5, it was like, oh my, how are we going to get this? What are we going to do to try to keep the soil covered now?
But at the same time,
because we reduced our fertility 20% per year over the course of 5 years. That's how we did it.
So by 2019, there was no fertilizer at all on the farm, on all the acres. Was the entire, it took 5 years to transition. We used Dr. Christine Jones' suggestion to reduce fertilizer by 20% over the course of 5 years, because as you can imagine, we were putting it all on. So our soils were completely addicted. and there was no relationship between the plant and the soil microbiome, so to speak. And so our plants were 100% reliant on whatever we fed them, just because in that system, that's what your plants are used to. And so it took time to wean off of that. That's not something you can quit cold turkey. We wouldn't recommend that to anybody. It wasn't like when we could pull insecticide and fungicide, we pulled those off right away, but the fertilizer is a different beast. Yeah. And so there was more acres of the Rouge de Bordeaux being grown. Those additional acres go direct to our elevator. It meets elevator spec. We are delivering a French heritage wheat to the local elevator, and we're profitable doing it. So it's a different way of looking at it. Are we growing our market direct to consumer? Absolutely. It's grown a lot in the last 3 years. It's grown faster than Kelly thought it would and slower than I thought it would. So it's probably right where it needs to be. And
and focusing more on like our biomass production, I kind of align with the regenerative grazing principles, where you don't graze too much off the land. You leave some, you return some, you leave some of that plant, 60% of that plant there, to keep the carbon cycle going. So we're leaving more material there on the crop ground by growing some of these maybe taller varieties or older varieties, or they tiller a little more, larger root systems. So we're returning more to the soil than we're removing. We're not just simply focusing on the grain production and returning nothing else to the soil, because we were struggling with the smaller varieties, struggling keeping the ground covered.
And the introduction of Guardian grains, starting with 1 bucket or 2 buckets of modern wheat going to direct to a customer, that wasn't about stacking enterprises, right? That's not about vertically integrating. It was a moral obligation to try to provide better choices to what our community had.
That locally was more an ask from our community, and a service we could provide them is what happened there. That wasn't something we targeted to become, that we needed to generate income because we now implemented these soil health practices. We implemented these soil health practices, and that gave us the financial freedom to do something like this, to do a passion project. When the community comes to us and asks, hey, we want better food. We want food that's not processed. We want food that nourishes our body.
We want to know where it came from. We want to know the farmer. We can answer back and give that to customers. And Kelly will tell everyone that you do not have to start a food company to farm the way we farm.
Yeah, no, you don't have to do that. That's not.
We are profitable delivering it to the local elevator at market price, right? So we are not organic, right? And we are not conventional, but we will deliver into the conventional commodity market and be profitable doing it. It's really, and that's partly because of our input costs are seed, right? Our own safe seed, and his time and effort into cleaning it.
Air, water.
And
those are pretty valuable inputs into the system.
Yeah.
Our air and our water.
Soil's an input as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
And a good time to say this, we've talked about soil erosion. You guys have bought dirt. And what, here in the plains, drought is always an issue. So we have to keep things covered. If they're not covered, they're eventually going to blow or wash. And I have trouble when I start hearing about farmers in the I states, Illinois, Indiana, and Illinois, that have drain tile in their fields. Talk about drought. Like, what are you talking about? Has it not rained there for 3 days? Like, you have drain tile in your fields. Do not come to me and complain that your soil is too dry or you have not received enough moisture, because I really don't want to hear it. It doesn't, I don't get that.
Right. We feel that we don't have any drain tile on our farm. We are 100% reliant on the rain that falls from the sky to produce our crop, right? So we don't understand drain tile from the perspective of taking the water away when you don't want it and then begging for it to come from the sky, or putting in a pivot to give it to, what I don't understand is irrigation and drain tile.
Yes.
In our,
Yes.
they got both. You got so much water, you can't infiltrate it. You need drain tile, but yet you're going to apply it with a pivot. So those are the two that we struggle with. But the truth is we have a water infiltration problem.
Yeah.
Let's figure out a way to get the water into the soil where it needs to be. And we can do that using roots.
And we have an oxygen problem. We have lack of oxygen in our soil. You know, I mean, you can go a little amount of time without water, but you can't go very long without air. You know, you need oxygen. Those living things in our soil need oxygen. So that's where our pore space, you know, our aggregate structure is going to
And if
become
there's
really important.
aggregate structure, we have water infiltration, right? If there is, those are key: earth,
you
air, and
crust-
water, right? This is
Crust
what we're
off,
looking at.
and if you crust off and seal the soil and compact, you know, we're out of airspace, we're out of oxygen. You know,
And
life doesn't live long without oxygen.
But you talked about that great big root ball in the Rouge de Bordeaux, okay? And that, you know, that it was a tall, leggy variety with a lot of straw, a lot of root mass. And you talked about the carbon. The carbon, see, what's sugar? CH4, C2H4? There's a lot of carbon in sugar. And sugars are what feed the plants. Root exudates feed the microbes. And the higher the sugar content in your plants, the less pest pressure you'll have, because insects lack the internal metabolic mechanisms to be able to metabolize sugar.
Okay.
So did you know that you could really reduce pest pressure by spraying sugar water?
yeah, we've witnessed farmers do it. And you can also greatly reduce the pest pressure by harvesting the sugar from the exudates, right? And just having the plant being more
And that's
microbially connected to the soil, so that way it gets the high sugar content it needs to defend itself from the pests, and we actually don't have to be out there fixing it, right?
And what we found is, you know, it was the excess nutrients that was separating the plant from its environment. You know, once it was no longer surrounded by excess nutrients, it was connected to our environment. And when we were connected to our environment, which, I mean, science has proven that now, our Brix levels we've been monitoring our Brix levels, but our Brix levels have become elevated in our plants since we've no longer had our plants surrounded with excess nutrients. You know, a little bit of deprivation is maybe okay. You know, we're going to trigger some of these biological processes.
And you're talking about excess nutrients from synthetics.
Yes, overfed.
And do you think that maybe some of those synthetics aren't necessarily bioavailable? That, like, just because we're putting 200 units of maybe only 20 units of that are actually available to plants?
Yeah, that's
right.
Absolutely
right.
But I think we can even overdo it even with an organic nutrient. I mean, if we end load that system, even with an organic input, if we come in with excess nitrogen, you know, that's gonna shut off a lot of these metabolic processes. And we're going to overload that system with. And if you look at a lot of these natural systems, you know, like even your grasslands behind you there, they're probably running a little lower on nitrogen. You know, they're not probably nitrogen abundant, or, you know, those natural systems are running a little lower on N. You know, and they seem to do just fine.
I'd say that's probably right. I was just sitting here thinking about, you know, some years I have a lot more legumes than others. Some years I have more warm season grass. Some years I have more clover. And it's always interesting to see and try to understand, why did I get more of these plants this year? Is it because of how I grazed last year? Is it because that one rainstorm that I caught in August? Like, well, why did that grow here? Oh, it's always interesting. Um,
So it's self-organizing, it's self-regulating, but you're just observing those things kind of fixing themselves.
We have an interesting, like I said, we have some native areas, 600 acres of both native and planted areas for wildlife. And in those planted areas, though, they might be areas that are too wet to get into with the air seeder or my little box drill in the spring, and we just kind of go around them. And then we come back in with a mix to make sure that we are keeping the soil microbiome fed, even if it's not a crop that we are going to harvest. So in those areas that are too wet when we're planting, we come back in and put a mix. And in that mix, we always have the same plants, which are
oats, safflower, yellow mustard, flax, peas, clover. Did I say safflower?
Yep, and Sudan grass. Usually there's some.
And Sudan, Piper Sudan.
So there's usually that same mix goes in the plots, and we just put the same mix all the time. It's
no-till it
right in.
Yep.
And on any given year, it used to be that the first year, the clover was what really showed up.
Not brassicas. First year, yellow mustard would pretty much dominate them.
Same mix, but the brassicas
pretty much just take it over. The brassicas, that early successional weedy species seemed to be dominating, and that was followed by our legumes. Then our legumes and our clovers and peas seemed to kind of dominate. But we watched that through a period of time, and what we were observing then was our soils moving through succession. So we were moving from those earlier successional plants to our later successional plants. Now today that same mix is planted, and it pretty much looks like a monocrop of oats. I mean, the oats free grass just kind of dominates those same rates, same seeds, but the mustards are now pretty small and non-competitive under the canopy. The clovers aren't really doing much anymore. They're staying really, really small, almost stunted. But the C3 grasses seem to be dominating, and we've done nothing but plant that same mix on those acres year after year after year.
And that's in an annual system, right? So that's not in a perennial system, but even in an annual system, we can watch the soil selection of plants and what's growing and what's going to be allowed to express itself, and just the succession, like Kelly said, of what is being called for. And that's been a really interesting observation, and kind of like, wow, we can put whatever we want here, and whatever the soil decides is going to be what expresses itself, which is pretty interesting. And so that has kind of spurred him into thinking how we can do that in our cropping systems, where we are currently in succession, and how we can add in those plants, those seeds that will become more, what would you say?
Companions and not competitive. So can we have these others, if we've moved our cropping systems up successionally, can we have these other plants in there and maybe remain understory, under the canopy of that crop, and still feeding exudates, but not dominating the crop mixture. So we could still take a dominant crop off the field, but have all these other things growing in there under canopy, these earlier successional species. That's kind of our thought process going forward. We're going to do some experimenting with that. Not exactly sure on how we're going to make that work, but I think that's a direction that we need to look at going forward.
Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit. I want to eventually get to talking about whole grain versus enriched grain or enriched flour. Deanna, you seem excited. Can you get us there?
I will try to use my best words.
Okay. Can you take us there?
Sure.
Okay. I'll kick
my
us
honest
off.
opinion.
Let me kick us off.
Great.
So I live in the house that I grew up in, and my parents were kind of hippies. I mean, like 70s, early 80s hippies. Like they kind of put some of the crunchy moms today to a little bit of shame. And I didn't grow up with a TV. Like, we didn't have a TV for a long time, and we had a big garden. And of course, you're a little kid. You eat what mom gives you. And if you've never seen white bread, and whole wheat bread is all you've eaten, when you first go to school and the other kids have white bread, it's like, hey, what's that? How come your bread's white and mine's brown? Why is that? Let me try that. So I tried a piece of white bread. And of course, I go home and I tell mom, like, hey, how come we don't have white bread? Says, well, white bread's not that great for you. It's more like candy. Eat whole wheat bread because it's better for you. And she explained to me about the difference between, like, how they make bleached flour and the differences in the whole wheat flour, what the wheat germ was, and that's where all the nutrients were. We leave that on the wheat, we put that in the bread, so we get all the nutrients. Now, white bread, they take that off. Oh, but it's enriched, so they put all the vitamins and minerals back in. Aha. But I think what we know now, a lot of us know now, is those vitamins and minerals that they enrich the flour with may not necessarily be bioavailable. All right, go.
Yeah, okay, I absolutely can relate with everything you're saying. And one of the things that you said is that they, enrich it with all of the nutrients, quote unquote, all the nutrients, which is a fraction of the nutrients is really the truth. And they aren't the same nutrients that they took away. They are, like you said, engineered in some way, whatever that is. And so when we started down this whole grain journey of eating our own wheat, I had not been making our own bread. I had not bought anything other than all-purpose flour in my life. I didn't like whole wheat pasta. I mean, I was the one bread kid, right? I was that kid that you sat next to in the cafeteria and enticed you with this white fluffy Wonder Bread, which
they didn't entice me. They wanted to hang on to it. They didn't want to trade for my crappy whole wheat bread. I promise you that.
Partly because of the sugar impact of it, but right, and it just hooks us. So we went down this roll, and Kelly was very patient in my baking efforts of using stone milled flour at home. And my bread was 2 inches tall, looked more like a banana bread. The summer sausage he was making in the winter from the deer that he had shot was bigger. The meat was actually bigger than the bread. It was not awesome looking, but he was just so grateful that I was willing to take the time to actually use the wheat that we were growing and feed it to our family, that he was very patient and he's very gracious. He is one of these guys that will not bite the hand that feeds him. But once you start feeding him better, he will demand it. So there is no store-bought bread in our house. And if there is, it's for a big birthday party that my son has maybe requested white buns from the store, and because they still do request it. But okay, so we started looking at the nutritional values of what we were getting, and you can't compare them. And so all-purpose flour is cheap, very cheap on the store shelves. So cheap. Why is it cheap? It's cheap because it's a byproduct of the wheat that we are growing. All-purpose flour is a byproduct. They are selling it to us inexpensively because what they really took away was the nutrition of the bran and the germ. And now those nutrients are sold back to us in supplements. Whether it's vitamin E or other vitamins, they are using the germ and the bran that they take away from the all-purpose flour, and they're putting it in supplements for us to buy at the nearest Whole Foods. That's what's happened to the flour. It is now a byproduct, which is why it's cheap. So And in being an all-purpose flour, it is all endosperm of the wheat kernel. So the wheat kernel has three parts. It has bran, it has germ. You just talked about that. Your mom knew that that's where the nutrients are. And the biggest part of the kernel is the endosperm, which is where the starch and the sugar is. Those starches and sugars are not digestible without the bran and the germ. So we are eating bread on the store shelves that is completely undigestible. And we wonder, and they're calling it gluten intolerance, and really it's a processing intolerance. Really, this is a problem in the processing. We are no longer eating the grain we are growing. You are eating a processed food product.
Almost an industrial byproduct.
Mm-hmm. And so that's what happens is the starch and the sugar, and the same thing happens in the pasta, in the blonde pasta that you buy on the shelf. If you ever know,
we buy good pasta. We don't buy Guardian Grains pasta, but we try to buy good pasta.
Okay, if you're buying blonde pasta, any blonde pasta, I will make an umbrella blanket statement and say if you're buying any blonde pasta that's made with semolina flour, that is the endosperm of the durum specifically, usually. It's straight starch and sugar. And if you've ever had pasta that is straight starch and sugar or blonde pasta, and you feel, if you notice you eat it and you feel like kind of sluggish, maybe you need a nap, whatever, that is the straight delivery of the blood sugar spike that it causes from all of the starch and sugar in
carbohydrate hangover.
Well, carbohydrate without any nutrition, carbohydrate with no digestibility, carbohydrate with no nutrient absorption, right? These are what we lose when we take away the bran and the germ. And so and plus this now blonde pasta is unrecognizable to your body as usable. And so our bodies are like, hey, I don't know what to do with this. I'm going to put this on your hip for 20 years. And that's where it stays, because it's not usable for our body to digest it and eliminate it. So it's a problem. The processing of the flour is a crime against humanity that's been allowed to go on for 100 years. They know it's bad. That's why they enrich it. And they still continue to put it on the shelf.
I've wondered for a long time, okay, if they take all of this stuff out of the grain, what do they do with it? And sell into the supplement industry makes sense. And B, the crap they're enriching it with, where do they get that?
Like, that's engineered.
And that's a real question. Like, okay, all these added vitamins and minerals, where is it coming from? And nobody wants to answer that question. But to package, like, oh man, the package, it's got this great big label on it, says enriched with 31 vitamins and minerals. Fantastic. Where did they come from?
And it turns out that it's really expensive to produce flour that is void of nutrients and void of nutrition, because they have to extract all the nutrients, and then guess what, they have to add it back in. And so there's a whole but they can do that cheaper than they can make more money selling the bran and the germ into the supplement industry or other places. It's not just the supplement industry that the bran and the germ end up, but it's cheaper to use those additives. And we believe that people are having a problem, not with gluten all of a sudden, but they are having a problem with processing, preservatives, additives, all of the things that are being done in the processing
to extend the shelf life.
I think you're spot on.
So whether you're growing it conventionally, regeneratively, organically, it's been changed in the processing to be unrecognizable from something we are growing in our fields. And that is and so when people start using fresh flour or milling their own flour at home, and they discover that they can now grow, or they can now enjoy wheat. Hang on one second, Brian.
Okay.
I gotta run and load a truck
Yep.
real quick. I'll be right back.
So
That'll happen.
yeah, sorry about that. It was supposed to be afternoon, but that's how it goes, right?
Truck drivers.
Yeah, it's exactly. And yeah, so it's good. But so, and that's what's happening, is that we are eating ultra processed food, or what they're selling to us as food. And so, yep, all the paperwork are on the, he will also have paperwork, but it's all on the 2 totes that are going. Yep. And so, yeah, it's a real problem. The processing is a problem, and this is where we go down the wormhole of the processing, because the farmer is getting the blame for everything. It's the farmer using too much chemical. It's the farmer using a desiccant. It's the farmer using whatever they're monocropping, or whatever they're targeting us with today. And the truth is, there needs to be more focus on the processing that's been allowed to happen in the US specifically. And the farmer takes the blame, right? And part of that, dealing with Guardian Grains, is we are in the position to help educate our consumers, and that help them know that there is not one farmer, whether you're conventional or regenerative or organic, or however you're identifying, that is trying to poison the food system. There's not one farmer that doesn't want to, that is trying to harm anyone. They are trying to remain economically viable in a structure that is highly, very expensive to stay in, as far as the input infrastructure and the equipment infrastructure and all of the things that we get married to in the big ag model, right? I still consider us big ag. We are still using big equipment. We are still using combines. We are still using a sprayer. We are still using a big air seeder and tractors. I consider ourselves a part of big ag, but I think that we can all do better. We can all do better with the tools we have.
Yes. And it's difficult being in ag to question things in ag, because it's real easy for somebody, you're questioning, like, hey, why are you putting that on your field? It's real easy for them just to pull out a card like, hey, we got to feed the world. Don't I don't have time for you. We got to feed the world. This is just what I got to do, because I don't have time to do it any other way. And I'm thinking of a quote is just like flashing neon in my mind. It's not the food, it's what's been done to the food. And I'm thinking about like processing that grain. Okay, we're going to mill the germ and the bran off. We're going to sell those to the supplement industry because they're more valuable as nutrients to the supplement industry. Okay. So what lower cost nutrients are they enriching that wheat flour back with to replace the crap they took out and sold to the supplement industry? So where do they get that? And they're doing that because it's, quote, cheaper or more profitable to trade those vitamins, minerals, and nutrients out. But what the industry doesn't want to tell us is where they're getting those from. And honestly, I don't want to know, because I just don't want to consume that product anymore, right?
Okay, right. Okay, are you buckled in? I don't want you to fall off your seat. This is probably nothing you don't know.
Okay.
But did you know that any food company, so we'll say me, I can buy a nutritional label on the internet based on my ingredients.
Yes.
Okay. And it costs about $50.
Okay.
Okay. And I can have a nutritional label for my pasta based on what I have in it, which for us is wheat, and water. The truth is, though, that's all based on an algorithm. That food is not specifically tested.
Right.
Those are all generated. So
and isn't that data they're generating, isn't that data set, isn't that from like the 50s or 60s?
And up to the 80s, maybe. And then when did nutritional labels become super important? In the 90s, when everyone started reading labels. And the truth is that when we started producing, let's say, for instance, our heritage pasta, we did specific nutrition testing on it because we needed to know exactly what was in it. And I had been directed to buy this nutritional label. And I said, how is this accurate? Like, I want an accurate account of the wheat, flour, and water that we're putting into this artisan pasta. I want to know exactly, or at least be close. I don't want an algorithm representing it. I want it tested. So that test costs about $1,600 to have the nutritional label with the calories and the carbohydrates and all of the nutrients that are in it. And it's important because we need to let people know that just because it's pasta doesn't mean it's what you've seen on the shelf before. And that the nutritional value of a whole grain pasta should be higher in fiber. It should be higher in protein. It should be higher in all of the micronutrients. Like, these are things that we can expect. And that's not what we're seeing represented on the store shelves. And a lot of those are not directly tested. So it's just an algorithm. And it's just a form that you can buy for $50 on the internet. At least it was a couple of years ago. Maybe it's more than that. I'm sure inflation has caused that to go up too. But it became something of a personal mission to try to find out exactly the nutrition that we were delivering in the grains and the flour and the pasta that we had going direct to consumer. And like I said, this is on a small scale, Brian. We are not in the shelves of Whole Foods and Sprouts and Erewhon and all of the boutique supermarkets.
I don't think you want to be, do you?
No, I would much prefer going direct to consumer. And people are used to buying their food and ordering it and having it delivered, at least somewhat on some scale, since the pandemic. And so it doesn't seem strange to have flour delivered to your door. And it doesn't seem strange to have pasta delivered to your door. And it doesn't seem strange to have a 5-gallon bucket of wheat berries delivered to your door. And that gives us a connection to our consumer. And there's a huge responsibility in doing it that way, because there is no buffer strip. There is nothing between us and our consumer. So when there's an issue with packaging, they come to me. If there's an issue with quality, they will come to me. If they want to know which herbicide I'm using, when I'm using it, they come to me. And part of that responsibility gets taken away when we go to the local co-op, because guess what? We deliver it to them. After that, it's not on us anymore. And we don't have to directly deal with the consumers that are worried about glyphosate on their wheat, and they're worried about glyphosate in their oats, right?
If they're not worried about it, they'll just go buy from Nabisco and King Arthur flour and Hudson cream and whatever.
Right. And the truth is that we can do better on every scale. And so because there's no buffer between us and 0.5% of our grain going to the consumer, right? That's not a huge amount, but it's enough to give us the responsibility to be able to be transparent and forthcoming with exactly what we are doing. And here's the thing is, our customer base is largely purchasing organic grains, organic flour, organic pasta, heritage, stone milled, whatever it is. They are sourcing organic, typically. So when they come to me and say, how come it doesn't say organic on your website? And I say, we use a herbicide pre-plant, and that if we need to come in at 3 to 4 leaf to mitigate weeds, we use a herbicide. I let them know that, but I let them know that we are testing outcomes. Everyone wants to know that there is no chemical residual in the food that they're eating. That's what they want to know. What I want is no chemical residual in their food. I don't want any chemical residual in their water. I don't want any in the air. This is our responsibility to do it better. And we can all be doing it better. And that is, so with that reassurance, these customers know, like, okay, yes, Guardian Grains, they are not an organic farm. They are using herbicide, but it's not showing up in the grains that they're growing. It's not in my pasta that I'm eating. It's not in the flour. They want to know that what they are eating and consuming is chemical free, and who can blame them, right? Absolutely.
And that goes back to your first Guardian Grains customer. He wanted wheat that had not been desiccated. Now, I understand what you're talking about. So growing up, Kansas is the wheat state, but now it seems like it's all corn, soybeans, and alfalfa. There's not a whole lot of wheat. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of wheat farmers left. I'd never heard of desiccating wheat to get it to dry down uniformly until just a couple of years ago. And it's my understanding that it's a fairly common practice in the northern states and in Canada to spray a desiccant on the wheat to get it to dry uniformly prior to harvest. Now, what nobody likes to talk about is that desiccant often is Roundup. And like, okay, we're going to go spray Roundup on our wheat crop 2 weeks prior to harvest, sometimes less. Not pointing any fingers and not looking at any direct neighbors, but within 2 weeks prior to harvest, we're going to spray Roundup on that so it can dry uniformly, and we can take it to the elevator and get that 14% protein, 13.5 moisture right on target that we need. Now, where I have a problem with this is somebody telling me that Roundup is safe and it can't get into the food supply. You can't tell me that. I do not believe it a single bit. And I feel like it ties into, part of the conversation we were having earlier. Like gluten intolerance, 100% a thing. Celiac disease, 100% real. Most people don't have those. Most people have an intolerance to enriched white flour and the garbage that's in it. Most people have an intolerance or have some sort of sensitivity to pesticide, herbicide buildup in the body or that was sprayed on the food, right? We didn't go from, like, celiac disease wasn't a thing when we were kids. We're kind of around the same age, like 40-ish. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Celiac wasn't a thing when we were a kid. Everybody ate bread. It was like, maybe you had one kid in school that was allergic to peanut butter. And now everybody's allergic to everything. Everybody's gluten sensitive. Half the kids are allergic to peanut butter or milk or eggs or feathers or air outside. It seems like, well, hell, I'm allergic to air outside in the spring because I'm allergic to every form of pollen known to man. But it maybe if we like use less chemicals in our world and allow more natural plants to take over, maybe some of us allergies will get better. I mean, Eastern red cedar pollen is horrible. Bradford pear pollen is horrible. And then the elm trees, their pollen is horrible. And what do we plant to make all our cities pretty? We'll plant all these pears. We'll plant all these. Anyway, like, we've created our own allergy problems because of how we treat the environment. and the chemicals we spray in the environment. So now that creates allergy problems. So now we have to invent more chemicals to give to people to cover up the allergy symptoms. And it ties into kind of a larger thought that I've had. If your food needs a lot of synthetic chemicals to be able to grow and have the appearance of health, very careful about those words, you will also need a lot of synthetics and a lot of inputs to maintain the appearance of health.
I'm in 100% agreement. Absolutely. And I think that there is I would say, back to the desiccant, it is used more widely here and north of here as a drying agent. I don't believe it can't show up in the food. Here's the thing. I am not anti anything. We need to have a balance, and we can't be pulling tools away from conventional farmers, regenerative farmers, whatever you want to call them. You cannot be pulling tools away without some sort of balance. So if we want, our people are sick because the soils are sick. Let's heal the soil. Okay, so we can start there. Let's heal the soil. Let's minimize the disturbance. Let's make sure, to me, the fastest way to ensure that we have a cleaner food system, cleaner water, and cleaner air is better soil. And if our soil, and how do we get better soil? We need biology. You need living soil. This is what we have to have in order to fix all of these things. Biology fixes everything, whether we're talking about the herbicide that's being applied and how that is being remediated by the soil biology, right? We're not talking about repeat disturbance, right? We are talking about minimizing disturbance. So if we're going into a no-till field, right, and applying a herbicide, that's a disturbance. We're minimizing the disturbance by not first vertical tilling it and then spraying the weeds. So I'm not going to tear up their home and then douse them. Like, that's not what we're talking about, minimizing disturbance. What we're talking about is keeping the home for the community, the soil biologically active community, keeping their home intact as much as possible, minimizing the disturbance. And when we apply a herbicide at a reduced rate, right? Because like I said, we're no longer dealing with super weeds. Our rates of herbicide are down 60%. That's a huge number.
Yeah.
That's a huge number. That is indicating that we are on a path to doing better, right? Not eliminating, but doing better. So let's make sure the biology is there to mitigate it. We all have some context of bioremediation. This is the importance of having soil biology in our systems to minimize and reduce the impact of our disturbance. So if we're using a herbicide, let's make sure the biology is there to metabolize it, to keep it out of the food, keep it out of the air, and keep it out of the water. This is the goal, right? This is how we can do it. So that is just one way that we are focused on minimizing our disturbance, is making sure our biological communities are fed and abundant, to make sure that when we do use a herbicide, they are eliminated and metabolized through the biology and not allowed to express it in the food that we are growing, in the water. We don't want water leaving our fields that's full of herbicide or fertilizer, right? All fertilizer use efficiency, we need better biology. You have to have biology to make that fertilizer available. It's a fact. Let's fix the biology, make it available, make it so it can do its job to bring those fertilizers to be more plant available. Soil biology fixes a lot. And we've eliminated it through massive amounts of tillage, repeat use of herbicide, fungicide, insecticide, right? We're killing our soil. The people are sick because the soils are sick. We have a chance to do better. And
we've farmed out the nutritional capacity. We've supplied all the nutrition, so our soils no longer function to supply the crop's nutritional needs.
true.
But the soils are dead.
I know, come right back in and pick up where I'm talking. It's almost like you never left.
It's like the soils, we've killed the soils. I mean, whether it's with synthetic fertility or herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, the whole combination of everything. We've turned what should be a living biodynamic system into just simply a growing medium or just aggregate, and not paid any attention to the interaction between different biologies, different species, even different classes between, like bacteria and fungi and plants. There's an interaction there that we're starting to understand now. And kind of like we talked about earlier, I think we sprayed so much of this stuff for so long that we've got some really serious problems with our soils on the whole. And I'm not gonna say that my soil doesn't have any problems, because there's farm fields 20, 30 miles north of me. There's farm fields 6 miles north of me, and I got a couple right on my southern border. And watching the neighbor to the south. Okay, so last year he had wheat and he had oats, like two little fields of each, like 30, 40 acres. And when it started raining there at the end of May, what happens to those oats and that wheat? It gets full of pigweeds, crabgrass, and kochia. Okay, not a big deal. Just call the spray plane, have the spray plane come and dust it. Then we'll go out. Then that kills the weeds, kills the grass. So he goes out and he swathed it, and he baled it 3 days after it was sprayed. Like, as soon as those plants started dying, he's out there running a swather and put it in a baler. The wheat did not get harvested. It got baled. Okay. And I think about that. And yeah, I had some overspray. I had some drift on my pastures. Yeah, good luck getting the spray plane or the sprayer man or the insurance company to even take you seriously about herbicide drift on native range. Like, they didn't. I got the insurance adjuster to come.
It didn't end up in your native water resource either, right?
Oh no, there's no possible way it ended up in any of that, because it was just ounces per acre. It's not that much drift. There's no way it caused all that damage. Like, really, a half a mile away, there's dying herbaceous plants. Like, okay, you're right, it didn't affect me at all. That's a fight that's coming in the future, I think. I mean, if I would have had like an almond orchard and they sprayed next to me and killed my almond trees, yeah, I'd have a case. I don't see as that there's a difference, but apparently, the insurance guys, there is. What was I saying? So, like 3 days after the spray plane was there, he's knocking it down and rolling it up in a bale. And I'm wondering, the guy that bought that hay, did you tell him that it was sprayed 3 days prior to baling? None of my business.
And
not a damn bit of my business, but did you tell the guy?
And from a forage perspective, would those weeds, and if he was going to cut it and bale it anyway, would those weeds have been a hindrance?
Oh, that's an excellent point. So,
or would it have been diversity?
Excellent point. So a friend of mine, an hour south of here, ran into the same situation, or similar situation. A couple of big wheat fields full of crabgrass, pigweeds, and kochia. Couldn't get the spray plane down there in time. So he's like, okay, well, what if I just call the silage chopper man? The chopper man comes out and we put it in the bunk for silage. Let's try that. So he put up 7,000 tons of feed at 13.5% protein for about $50, $55 a ton. I mean, that's really good, cheap cow feed. At that point, you can go bale up like Johnson grass. You can give them Johnson grass, and then you give them that silage, and they'd probably make a pretty decent living. I mean, 13.5% protein ration, you don't need a lot else. At least my cows wouldn't. Maybe higher input cows would. But I think about that, and it's like, what did the spray plane cost? What did that chemical cost to come out and bale dry wheat, to come out, and then what it cost to come out and bale the dry oats, and how much more feed value would have been there if it would have been baled with all the quote weeds in it, because there's no such thing as a weed. It's just good cow feed, or maybe it's a plant that's misplaced. I anyway, it just seems like we burn up a lot of good cow feed. We burn up a lot of good cow feed because nobody can tell you how to farm. But the insurance man coming out saying, well, if you want to get paid for it, you got to spray it and cut it and haul it to the elevator, and then I'll pay you for it after we find out what it makes. There's a lot of decisions I think people make that are made by others or driven by others that they don't necessarily realize. Oh,
Yeah, absolutely. With the rules and regulations, right? There are things that where you have to manage, like no doubt. And I think that's the biggest thing is, if we as farmers don't start using these tools more efficiently, more appropriately, they're going to start taking them away. And when they start taking them away, it is going to get very hard to farm very fast. And we are going to have to, when they start taking some of these tools away, if we're talking about herbicide specifically, what does that leave us in our small grain operation on a no-till system? We are left with what then is the choice to either turn it back into pasture, where maybe it once was, where we will have to invest in infrastructure for livestock again, or we are going to have to till the weeds away, right? Or we are going to have to figure out how to use it better. And so that's where we are wanting farmers to like take more of a responsibility. And the agronomy center does not have your soil's best interests at heart always. They are selling you the next thing that they can.
Well, that's what Brian had a good point. Like, we put our confidence in others, and those others might be that agronomy center promoting their service. And that service might have been a pre-harvest desiccant to those weeds on that hay crop, because that's their service they're promoting. We see the same thing in the grain industry. They're promoting a pre-harvest desiccant for weeds. The problem is the crop is too far mature, so it's sprayed to promote the service from the agronomy center, but then they're in there harvesting 2-3 days later, and the kochia spots are still grass green, because it'll take 14 to 20 days to dry those things down, and they're still combining around all the kochia spots. So, if we didn't have our confidence in those others, we may have just went around there, harvested around those spots, went in, hayed the wheat and the kochia out for our cattle, or done something to them at that time after harvest was done. But we rely on those services provided from those other industries.
And that's what I mean. I think we just all, as farmers, we need to start using, making better choices and looking at it from a resource concern. How will this affect our soil? How will this affect our water resource? How will this affect our biology? How is this affecting the food that we are putting on people's plates?
And
right?
Granted, there's a lot of money involved, and there's jobs involved, and people rely on those jobs in a lot of those centers. But maybe we can redirect some of that labor, and go into your small scale beef processing or small scale grain processing. Maybe we can create those jobs to provide a better food product, instead of creating those jobs to bring detrimental consequences to our soil, and still keep those people employed, but just switch what we're doing with that employment.
I think a lot of production could be decentralized and moved out of wherever it's ended up, and decentralize that back out to the rural areas. So here's how I want to end. I want to talk about grain milling, food processing, the rules, what you guys had, the hurdles you had to come up with. And then I maybe want to talk about how much the direct to consumer part of the business contributes to the overall farm bottom line in comparison to the 0.5% of the actual volume of grain going to that channel. I want to know how much that contributes to the bottom line.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack. Okay, so let's go into the milling process of it. That started 2 years ago in April. As 2 years this April, we'll have been in full production of stone milled flour and artisan pasta out of a facility that we rent in a rural area. The town is called Tuttle, North Dakota, and it is 110 miles from our farm to the Tuttle Rural Innovation Center, which is a town of 60 people, and it's in a 100-year-old schoolhouse that had a USDA inspected kitchen in the basement of this 100-year-old schoolhouse, right? Like, and I was directed there through Northern Crop Institute in Fargo, North Dakota, that said that they were looking for a pasta project. And we had worked with the Northern Crop Institute to produce pasta using stone milled flour from a New American Stone Mill, which is built right in Vermont, and producing pasta using just stone milled flour with all of the nutrients. So the bran, the germ, and the endosperm milled at a low temperature, stone ground, and then adding water. There were a lot of hurdles just to make that project happen. They didn't want to do it exactly how they said that we could do it when we set up the project.
Because ours was too simple. Our ingredient list was wheat and water. That's what we wanted to make it with.
And which was the understanding when we set up the pilot, was that, okay, we want to come in and do a stone milled flour using a heritage red wheat, which is already breaking the rules, Brian, right? Because, pasta's made from durum.
Yes.
And we're going to be breaking the rules. And now you want to come in and not only use not durum, now you want to use a hard red wheat. That's just, outside the box a little bit. And then you want to stone mill it. So
and I produced that wheat with air and water. So why would we want to start introducing things now? Like, let's continue with this. Let's carry this through to the consumer.
So they understood that the project was to stone milled flour, add water, and produce pasta. But when we got there, there were hurdles put in place that, well, we'll have to sift the stone milled flour, take out the biggest pieces of bran, and then those biggest pieces of bran will be hammer milled, and then we'll reintroduce them. And I said, well, that's already a portion of them.
Yes.
And I said, well, that's already more processing than we want to do. We want to take stone milled, a whole wheat berry, stone mill it into full nutrition flour, and we want to add water. And that's what we came to do. And he gave us lots of excuses. And he said, well, we're going to have to add egg powder. Otherwise, it won't stick together. And I said, if we add egg powder, it's not a vegan option. This is what we came here to do. We're making pasta using stone milled flour and water. That's what we're here to do. And Kelly finally just said to this poor guy, just do what she wants.
Yeah, you're better off.
Just do what she wants. It's a lot easier than arguing with her.
Just tell her yes. And when it doesn't work, she'll be quiet. But you have to prove to her that this is not going to work her way, or she will continue to beat this drum. And so the guy pretty much threw his hands in the air and was kind of like,
okay, we'll do it.
We'll do whatever. And when it doesn't work, and I said, and when it doesn't work, we can quit, because I am not putting something out there to the consumer that they can already get. This is something different. This is something that we are producing from our farm, and we are wanting to minimize the processing. Lo and behold, long story short, you can actually produce excellent pasta using stone milled flour and water and a hard red wheat. And so we did that. And so with having these samples, then I had nowhere to produce it. There are 4 pasta companies in our state producing pasta.
You missed one key moment there in the baking tests at NCI.
Oh, the baking
test. The aroma that overtook the.
So also with the pasta project, they also did baking tests with the flour, and everyone came to the baking lab wanting a cinnamon roll. And the baker was just like, well, we're not baking cinnamon rolls today. We have bread. No, we smell cinnamon rolls
The whole
downstairs.
place smelled like sweet cinnamon rolls.
And it turns out that that is the fragrance of the wheat that we're growing has sort of a cinnamon aroma. And so it was, was mistaken for cinnamon rolls, and
So
turns
kind
out
of
it was
changed the terroir of the grain we grow based on the soil health on the farm. So it kind of identified by our bioregion, and it was, they hadn't smelt that before.
And it's
Like, it was
interesting because
like it was,
we have customers that have bought Rouge de Bordeaux from other farmers in different states, in southern areas, that don't taste the cinnamon that they can taste in the Rouge from our farm. So every place has a taste. And we are, and that's some of the ongoing testing that we're doing with the flour and the whole grain and the pasta, is the phytonutrient testing for flavonoids and things like this, so we can actually kind of trace some of that and where it's coming from. So like I said, we had produced this pasta that, woohoo, we did it. And now we have nowhere that will actually produce it at scale. And so the 4 pasta companies around the States all politely told me no. And the one said, oh, I guess we could do it. But you would need to bring me 20,000 pounds of flour, and the pasta you produce that we produce and that you get back may not be from the flour you brought us. So because of their processing volume, they lose traceability. And so I was like, well, we can't have that. Like, this is supposed to be like heritage wheat variety. Like, I can't have just any random thing. So there was a problem with the processing, because everything's so massive and married to the infrastructure that everything is such a huge scale. There was no artisanal, no small scale pasta production that we could utilize that was close enough where we didn't have an economic like impact on the carbon footprint of just transferring the grain from here to there, right?
Right.
And so it became obvious to us, if we were going to do this, we were going to have to do it ourselves. And Northern Crop Institute said, there's a place in Tuttle looking for a pasta project. And I was like, well, great. Where is Tuttle? And I looked it up and I found out it's in this 100-year-old schoolhouse. And so I called the Tuttle Rural Innovation Center. It sounds like it's awesome. And I called and I'm asking all the questions. How many days a week do you produce pasta? What kind of packaging do you need? How many days are you shipping? Like, I'm asking all the questions. And this little director that they had at the time was like, well, wait, we don't actually produce the pasta here. And I was like, wait, what? She's like, no, we want to rent out our kitchen space. And I was like, what? I said, I thought you had a pasta machine. She's like, we do. We have a $25,000 Italian pasta machine under a draped cloth that's been sitting here waiting for somebody to rent our space. And when you rent our space, you can use the pasta machine. And I said, I don't know how to produce pasta. And she's like, we can learn together. I was like, wait a second. So not only do you want me to grow the wheat, now you want me to mill the wheat, produce the pasta, and deliver it to consumer. Like, it was just a lot. And she was like, it'll be so great. Bring me some of your flour. And so all I had at the time, Brian, was a little stone milled countertop flour that I have on my counter behind me. That's all I had. So I brought 10 pounds of Rouge de Bordeaux stone milled flour from our home. And I got Kelly to come with me to the Tuttle Rural Innovation Center. And it was November that year. And it was starting to snow, so things were getting cold. We get to the Tuttle Rural Innovation Center, and this 100-year-old schoolhouse is 2 stories. It sits on the end of Main Street. It's like a shining beacon of hope for me to be like, yes, we can deliver stone milled pasta to customers. And we get in there, and Kelly basically checks out because
the heat is off.
There's no heat.
It's November.
And it's 35 degrees. And there's no heat because the 100-year-old schoolhouse is heated with coal. And once they fire up the coal stoker, it's a 2-a-day job. So they have not fired up the coal stoker, but this little, the director at the time of the Tuttle Rural Innovation said, no problem, we'll heat up water, we'll do all the things. And we get there and Kelly basically checks out. We produce pasta there.
There was no hot water either.
There was no hot water.
No, keep in mind, this is the Tuttle Rural Innovation Center, and we had no heat or hot water to start the Rural Innovation Center.
But we had a purpose.
I
Yes.
live a mile away from a community of 45 people.
Okay, so you can understand, like, it's right. It's just part of it.
Yeah, it's just part of it. And when you're that far from town, sometimes it takes a minute to get stuff.
Right. And so we produced pasta that day. We had a great time and we left there. And Kelly put his hand on my knee and he said, I'm really sorry. This is not going to work out for you. And I just looked at him and I was like, what are you talking about? We are doing this. He was like, wait, what? I was like, oh, yeah, we're doing this. He was like, Deanna, there's no heat. I said, they're fixing it. And he said, there are no people. And I said, I just need two. And I said, I can do anything for a year till you can me up something closer to home. And that was the idea of pasta production and flour production in the Tuttle Rural Innovation Center, where we have been producing flour and pasta and shipping out grains for two years. We are still in that facility. We like using the facility. It is existing infrastructure. If we don't rent the space, I don't know who will. And it had the added benefit of a $25,000 pasta machine that we could use and produce pasta any way we wanted. We were successful in learning how to do that. And so that's where we are working out of currently. We had 2 employees. We have now 1 that is working there 40 hours a week. And I go there and deliver grain by the 25-pound sack. And so there are a lot of inefficiencies that are happening dealing with production 110 miles from home, but it is currently what we are working with. And the community of Tuttle has been very gracious and open and willing to help us. And in our corner, I feel like 100% for being outsiders coming in. They've been really great to accept us, and we love using the facility and having the community there. And so it's been really fulfilling for us to use that space and to start flour and pasta production. So that's where we are operating out of. And you had a list of questions, and I got sidetracked, and so now I don't remember the rest of them.
It's okay. How much, you said that 0.5% of the grains you guys grow go direct to consumer. And it surprised me you just said that you have a full-time person now at the pasta mill. So how much, the 0.5% that you run through the direct to consumer in the pasta business, how much does that contribute to the bottom line? Don't tell me dollars. Like, can you tell me maybe a percentage?
It doesn't.
Okay.
It doesn't. It's a wash.
Okay. And that's fair.
It's a wash. It doesn't contribute. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort and a lot of nights for us both. Some of them are overnights when we're dehauling spelt and trying to produce a better option for people. And
But we brought a job to that community. There's someone living in that community that had something fulfilling to do, and that was our main goal. If we could keep them employed and bring, that's one of the kind of the poorest
counties.
Not all,
and to bring in
profit isn't always defined as what ends up in your bank account, I guess.
Right.
It's been fulfilling on a spiritual and emotional level and on a feeling of purpose for our community, because if the regeneration of our farm to have a lasting impact, the best way we can do that and the most meaningful way we can do that is that the regeneration of our farm has to spread out beyond our borders and into our neighbors. And one of the best ways we can do that is through food.
And it is the food that actually got the community involvement engaged on our farm. It was that direct connection through food, that brought the community members back to the farm, back to where their food came from, back to the soil, kind of connected them back to their environment. Because there's the communities in the city, they're extremely disconnected from their environment. And that's one of the best ways we found was to establish that connection was through food.
And so the economic impact for us isn't our why.
Okay.
It is about feeling like we have a direct responsibility.
You know, we might be one small little company doing something better, but we're doing what that consumer asks. You know, and maybe our small little effort will create that speed bump to make the industry respond. That these people want better food, they want less processing.
And we have had options to expand, to go bigger, to go into retail, to go into all of that, right? That has been an option. We have chosen not to do that. We have chosen to keep it smaller and deliver quality over quantity. And eventually, you know, and we're seeing it now. And we're seeing now instead, and this is part of the community that we're building with other farmers across the US and into Canada, is that we are now starting to see the result of moving truckloads of Rouge de Bordeaux whole grain instead of bucket loads, right? This is 3 years in the making. It's starting to come to fruition where we are moving larger volumes that are more direct to consumer. So direct to a bakery that is utilizing it in their larger city, in their area of 1.2 million people. So those kinds of markets are coming for us. And it's taken a lot of connection with other farmers and people in the baking industry and consumers to help connect those dots and to connect us with different type of people that are still willing to let us keep things small and not have to retail market things. And it's been an evolution of watching how things are changing and things are starting to turn. And it's been a slow progression, and we've been in the growing pain stage of it here on the farm. So our farm was not set up to clean the grain, store the grain separately in bins and have it preserved in hopper bins that are for Rouge de Bordeaux, hopper bins that are for Egyptian hulless barley and for spelt and for turkey red winter wheat. So we were not set up for that when this started. When you're selling it by the bucket, you don't think you're going to need a 5,000 bushel bin, right? So there were things that we were a little cart before the horse. And so we've been in the growing pain stage of it for a few years. And Kelly has invested heavily into grain cleaning building where we can clean on farm. And that was partly because we wanted to make sure that we knew that our customers did not want grain that had been in contact with GMO crops. Right? You have to respect that. So when you're going direct to consumer, if they are saying, we are not going to buy this, if this has gone through the same cleaner as a soybean, you have to know that you can't do that. And so they will kind of direct you in a way that, okay, we can't do that. We can't bring it to our local grain cleaner who's cleaning everyone's, even if it's conventional soybeans. They don't want soybeans around at all, some of these customers. So whether they're conventional or non-GMO, they don't want soy in contact with their grain. Those are things you have to consider, and they can be hurdles and they can be overcome, but it takes a lot of effort on our part and a lot of grit and determination to be willing to go the next step and go past where we're comfortable, which is the commodity market, right? This is one extra layer of ensuring that the regeneration of our farm spreads out into the community. And that community started being so far spread across the US, everywhere across the US. And this year, our focus is really more of a regional market where our state only has 700,000 people. And so we are focused on a regional market: Montana, Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota. These our focus is. We will still ship to all of our customers all over the US. But when we're looking at an economical impact of the footprint of what it takes to get the grain to Florida from my house, right? There's a huge, and everyone needs to be eating more local food. And so it's been a huge evolution of sorts, and we are seeing it turn from selling by the bucket to selling by the truckload, which I think is a relief for Kelly, because we can move a little more volume, because at the same, that's what we do, right? We move grain by the truckload. And so when I started selling it by the pound instead of by the bushel, it was a huge transition for us. And it's growing all the time, but it's taken its time, which I think is good. And sometimes it seems like it's really slow, and sometimes it seems like it isn't growing fast enough. But
I think that slow progression has allowed you to stay true to the purpose. You know, we wanted to make this a purposeful business, and I think that's allowed us to stay true and not sell out to the big marketing firm or something to just market a name.
Mhm.
You know, we didn't want to be that, you know, so I think that was, you had to say no to a lot of that stuff, you know. And I mean, there might have been economic opportunities there that we walked away from, but to remain true to our purpose, we had to do that. We had to simply say no. And a lot of that no was to the big money.
And to stay away from the investors who were willing to put up a $3 million grain cleaning facility for us next month, right? To say no to those investment dollars and say, well, we will work on our own income stream instead. And so we have utilized some of the Department of Agriculture grants for our stone mill. And we did have help with that, and some marketing dollars to help us create a more regional market. But other than that, this is when I approached Kelly with this, and I said, can we afford to invest here? And he's like, I don't see it paying, but I will invest in you. And if this is what you want to do, we will make it happen. And so this is where we have gone with it. This is where we're going with it. It's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of our own dollars and our own time, and time spent away from our kids, and time with our kids out bagging grain and all of the things.
And when you're out there and it's cold and you can't feel your fingers and you're gritting your teeth, and then you'll get an email from a customer that says they can't believe the flavor of this bread, or this is the most nutritious pasta that they can buy. You get one of those emails, then you sit down in the chair and it's like, okay,
it's not so cold today.
Yeah, now we can actually sit down and we can put a value on soil health.
Or
there's people in that community that are valuing what we are doing by every time they buy a bag of pasta or a bag of flour.
Or you get a soil health hero like Jay Fear that says we're one of his grocers, right? That's a huge, and that thanks us, that comes to see me at a trade show and says, thank you for doing what you're doing.
I mean, those guys are giants,
right? You know? And it makes it worth it. So there are payoffs that we can't always see on the bank statement. And but those bank statement payoffs are starting to be more of a real thing than they were 3 years ago. And
that's kind of become a side effect. We stayed true to that purpose and just did what was true and whole. The same with soil health. We just stayed true to it, and we pushed through kind of an ugly duckling phase there, but stayed.
Is that what we're calling it?
Yeah, we stayed true to our purpose, and in the end, it paid off. You know, soil health paid off. Period. You know,
it always does. It always does in the end.
Yeah, always does. And the food was the same way. We wanted simple ingredients. We wanted to stay true to our purpose. We wanted to make sure they could identity preserve everything. We stayed true to that purpose. You know, and now it's showing. You know, the economics of it is kind of a side effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's been huge. And Kansas, just so you know, is a hub for us of support. And they have the state, there's so many people in the state of Kansas have just encouraged us. and continue to support us through their purchasing Guardian grains and flour, and it's been awesome. And sometimes we have to find our cheerleaders not in our own state, but we have to go further away. And now we're finding cheerleaders in our very own state, you know, so it's been a huge evolution of where it's come from and where it started.
And even ranchers wanting to feed their animals better. That's been a huge.
Okay, so Brian, we're cleaning all this grain, right? We clean all this grain, and then what are we going to do with all these screenings? Miraculously enough, there are like little backyard chicken flock producers all over the state, and they are coming here to our farm to pick up 2 and 3 totes, 2,000 pounds of grain in a tote for their chickens, because they know that they're getting mostly whole grain, some weed seeds, and it's desiccant free because they care about that too. And these chicken producers don't want any soy in it. And so we have an outlet for the screenings, which has been, right, one of those things you don't fully think of, like, well, if we're going to clean all this grain, we're going to have a lot of screenings. Like, it was not fully realized at the time, but the
livestock producer really understands animal health, and they really want to do whatever they can to support the health of that animal, to make that animal healthier. So I mean, they really value a healthy grain, a healthy forage, a healthy soil. I mean, they've got that understanding.
Yeah,
you know, so they'll do anything they can to make that animal better, create that environment so that animal has a healthier environment to live and thrive in.
Right, and that's in full circle, right? That's huge. That's our community, supporting our community through food, and then the livestock producers coming to us to feed their animals better. It's pretty awesome.
Because I mean, here in North Dakota, we have winter, we have snow. There's going to be a time and period where they're going to have to be fed something. You know, we can't just, you know, a lot of people think we can graze 365 days a year, but they're
not feedlot producers, but they
can,
yeah.
But there's a time in January where they're going to need a little shelter, a little food.
Yes.
You know, but yeah, those livestock producers have been really, really a fun group to get engaged in, and how passionate they are about those animals and the health of those animals.
And they're like, well, we want them on grass, but when they can't be, they need to be eating the best. Isn't that, I mean,
because
that's great.
We don't raise meat chickens or meat pigs or meat cattle, but I enjoy a steak, I enjoy a pork chop, I enjoy eggs, I enjoy chicken, I enjoy all that stuff. And I mean, I find these passionate producers, and that's who we're sourcing from, because they're treating their animals better. And I know if they treat their animals like that, they're producing a healthy food product. And that's what I want to introduce into my body.
And they're passionate about it. Like, they're in it. They want that part of it. And we are not in the livestock business, you know, above ground anyway. So we just, you know, can appreciate the experts in their own field, right? And so, and to be sourcing from experts that know exactly how they want to raise their animals is worth it. And so
absolutely,
we will spend our buying dollar there. If we're wanting the community to spend their buying dollar with us, we will also spend our buying dollar with the producers in the livestock industry that are doing and growing the way we want the animals to be fed. So it's awesome.
Well, great stuff, guys. I really appreciate your time today. Where can people find you on the internet? Where can they buy Guardian Grains, and how can they get a hold of you?
GuardianGrains.com is where we are online, and you can get us through email, ndfarmgirl1@gmail.com. And I'm all over Twitter as ndfarmgirl. Well, it's not Twitter anymore. Sorry. That's been a hard, okay, X. And then Instagram and Facebook at Guardian Grains Community. So we are, I am on the social medias. Kelly is not, because, you know, he's out there doing all the other things.
Loading trucks and stuff.
That's fine. Like, if sometimes I'd rather not be on social media as well. All right. Great place to end. guys, thanks for your time. Deanna, Kelly, Lozinsky, really appreciate it today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Brian.
Again, thanks for being here. And gang, have a great week. We'll see you.